Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Archer. I'm a community program coordinator with the Heartland Environmental Justice Center. I'm going to kick things off with a quick overview of today's webinar, which is actually part of a series that we're really excited to be coordinating. And this series is focused on building community power and engaging more folks in the environmental decision-making process. It does feel really appropriate that this first one is focused on navigating the federal government, as it's a great starting place to try to get answers and support for pressing environmental challenges. And we also see an immense amount of support right now for environmental justice issues. In today's webinar, we're going to be talking about how communities can engage the federal government. We'll be sharing tips for how to build those effective relationships with federal partners and some insights on navigating federal funding opportunities. Our speakers today join us from the Environmental Protection Network, which is an organization that helps people more effectively and meaningfully participate in government decision-making, and the Midwest Climate Collaborative, which is an organization that's committed to developing an equitable and collaborative response to the climate crisis. Shonali has been a liaison for Region 7 with the EPA. Mark is a former EPA regional administrator for Region 7, and Heather has multi-sector experience as well as building an intentional community around building transparency and navigating the grant development process. So we're really excited about the wealth of knowledge that they bring to the topic of navigating the federal government and federal systems, and hope that you will reach out to those organizations as well as the HEJC as a follow-up from today's webinar. A little background on who the Heartland Environmental Justice Center is and the work that we're doing. We are the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center, or TICTAC, for Region 7, which includes Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and adjoining Indigenous nations. And we work to support organizations that are advancing environmental justice in their communities. Our goal for today is to share meaningful actions and opportunities that you can take to advance environmental justice in your community, and know who you can ask to take that first step. There's a lot of resources we'll be sharing. We just want to make sure you understand the HEJC or others on this call is a great first step for getting connected to those resources or getting your questions answered about how to get started. And then something that the HEJC can do is follow up with customized technical assistance. Here's just a quick snapshot of the services that the HEJC provides. While we're primarily focused on helping people prepare for submitting grants and managing grants, we recognize that that need can really vary in scope and scale. And so we can really adapt to understand and meet the needs of your community, and kind of work together to figure out how to get you to that place of getting sustainable funding. And we don't do this work alone. We are connected to a network of partners that can provide subject matter expertise or a local insight on the landscape that you're working in. So these are partners that we work with directly through our TICTAC, but we have others as well that we can access or get in touch with to support the work that you're doing. And before I pass it off to Shonali, who is our first speaker, I just want to do a quick summary to share how we got to where we are today in terms of the federal government's mandate on environmental justice. So as many people know, and especially the folks on this call, we know that environmental justice work, it's not a new term, and it's work that has been happening for decades. What started as primarily a protest movement that was led by community organizers, activists, and researchers has led to where we are today, which includes a federal response that ensures policies, resources, and funding is directed at those that are most impacted by environmental injustice. We also see that federal agencies are now kind of looking at things through a different lens, and that they're proactively working to protect communities, dedicating staff support, and investing in those that need it the most. We also can see today that there has been an unprecedented amount of federal funding directed at environmental justice, and that's through large pieces of legislation like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL, IRA, and the Justice 40 initiatives. these investments and priorities have made environmental justice a central driver to a lot of the key activities happening at federal agencies. A clear example of that is through something known as the Environmental Justice Scorecard, which tracks how federal agencies perform in terms of their environmental justice work. I also want to acknowledge that there's still a great amount of work that needs to be done to ensure that federal funding reaches those that have been leading this work historically and that need the support the most. I wanted to include a snapshot of a definition. This is one pulled from the EPA website that provides some guidance on how we understand environmental justice work. And I think this is important to share because you can see that environmental justice is not separate from meaningful engagement. So that term, meaningful engagement, almost always is included in a federal definition of environmental justice. And I think that's really important to show that, you know, as we see more funding and support be available to these communities, we must pair that with access, education, and support to ensure that community members are participating in the planning process and the decisions being made in their community. And that's where these civic engagement webinars can really come into play and help people understand how to navigate that process. I also wanted to share, you know, we're not going to have time today to dive deeply into every federal agencies and the work they're doing, but this is just a snapshot of a few that we, you know, might interact with pretty frequently. Primarily, we do work with the EPA, and that's who Shonali is going to really talk to us about, but we also work with the DOE, USDA, FEMA, Department of Transportation, HUD, as well as the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Indian Health Services. We'll share out this document so you can look at it in more depth, but it kind of helps categorize the environmental justice topics that each one of these federal agencies might deal with. While there might be some intergovernmental collaboration, you kind of see that they each own a topic area that they're going to provide custom support and services for. So again, this is not a comprehensive list. This is some work that's being done at all levels of federal government, but these are kind of the common players that we see and that we interact with. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Shonali.
Thank you, Anna. And everyone, before I get started, I just want to please note if there's at any point you can't hear me, please drop something in the chat, or, you know, just feel free to come off mute and let me know. My headset is kind of notoriously unreliable. But yeah, thank you. Hi, my name is Shonali Palacios, and I work for the Environmental Protection Network. I'm going to start off just by talking a little bit about what EPN is and what we do. We are notably not a federal agency, that's the EPA, but we work around them and interact with them a fair amount. So I'll be talking a little bit about EPN and what we do, and then I'll be talking a little bit about EPA and upcoming grant opportunity from EPA, and then I'm going to very barely touch on DOE and FEMA and how to get in touch with them and some of the things that they do. So EPN. Also, another note, I speak very, very quickly and I speak with a lot of acronyms. I'm going to try and avoid doing that as much as I possibly can. If you need me to slow down or if you need me to say less letters, just let me know. Okay, that's the big disclaimer. So EPN, or the Environmental Protection Network, was founded in January of 2017 from a network of EPA alumni. We provide, at the time, we were doing a lot of providing of public comment on policy that the EPA was coming out with at the time. Slide, please. All right, so this is kind of our organizational structure here. We currently have a network of around 650 EPA alumni. So these are people who used to work for the agency who are now either retired or have moved on to doing different things outside of the EPA. And basically the idea of EPN is to leverage that kind of massive reservoir of knowledge after their careers at EPA are over. And one of those wings is our policy wing. So commenting on things that the EPA does nationally and kind of providing information and public policy advice. Another of those wings is the EPA recruitment wing. So we have EPN volunteers go to schools and work with students to diversify EPA's workforce and, you know, try and make the agency seem like an appealing place to work because they all loved it so much. That central prong is where I work. That is EPN's pro bono capacity building technical assistance program. It's my favorite wing of EPN, although I'm biased. And essentially, what we do in our capacity building technical assistance program is we pair frontline communities with volunteers from EPN for pro bono consultation. And that can look like a lot of different things, right? So we help groups kind of interpret permits and rulings near them. We translate that into lay language and help people explain how these things are going to affect their lives and disseminate that information. We can assist groups write public comments and tell them, who to get that commentary to. And then, as Anna just mentioned, I probably don't need to tell the people on this call, there's a massive amount of funding coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act right now. There's been a massive amount of funding coming out of the federal government generally lately, and we found a lot of demand for help with grant applications. Now, we don't do grant writing, but we do help people basically program navigate. We help them find out whether they're eligible for grants, which grants they're eligible for. We help them kind of do some proposal scoping, and on the back end, our volunteers, given enough time, can help review grants to help communities work them over to be the most competitive that they can be. For some of the larger grant opportunities, like community change grants, if you've heard of those, EPN has also been providing checklists and templates to basically provide a skeleton for the work that a community needs to do to turn in a grant and to help them stay organized. We help groups come to their award agreements with EPA. And then that sort of last thing, and by the way, these sort of 4 points that I've mentioned here are by no means an exhaustive list of the technical assistance we provide. I would say that if EPA has a speciality in it, it's likely that there's somebody in our network with some requisite knowledge on a subject, and we work on a very vast array of things, but these are the things that commonly come up. And on that note, the last thing I'll talk about that we do is partnership building. So we help groups identify who from various federal agencies they should be talking to. We help, if our community groups are interested in this, we help them connect with each other for peer-to-peer learning and support. And then, of course, there are things that we don't do in-house, right? So our volunteers cannot testify as expert witnesses in court, for example, or we can't help with grant writing. But we, as regional associates, try and make it our business to know who does that near you, so that even if we can't help you with something at EPN, we can refer you out to somebody who can. And that is, part of the genesis of our partnership with HEJC and with the Midwest Climate Collaborative is with that intention, right? That we might not have all the services you need, but hopefully we either know somebody who does, or at least we know somebody who knows somebody who does. Slide, please. This is our technical assistance map. You'll see me all the way over to the right in the Mid-Atlantic region. I have been living and working in St. Louis for the past 5 years. So I was formerly in Region 7, which is why I'm on this call now. But lucky you guys get my colleague Ryan Makarem as your new community outreach associate. Ryan lives in Kansas City, and he'll drop his email in the chat in a second. And he services the Midwestern region. So EPA Region 7, that's Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri. Slide, please. All right. Now, what I was actually asked to speak about, the EPA. So the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. I think a lot of our volunteers like to make the note that as much as it is the Environmental Protection Agency, it is also directly under the purview of the EPA to protect human health. And it is a health agency, nearly as much, or maybe as much as it is an environmental protection agency. And thank you, Ryan. If you want to get in touch with him, his email's in the chat now. So EPA works on establishing and enforcing regulations based on laws passed by Congress, like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. They then are in charge of monitoring and enforcing those regulations. So, monitoring air pollution, monitoring water pollution, and creating enforcement to make sure that whatever pollution is staying below the threshold that the agency has decided. EPA conducts research on environmental issues and promotes new technologies for pollution control. They do education and outreach, and then importantly, grant management, right? Providing funding to state and local environmental protection initiatives. I'm going to spotlight an upcoming grant opportunity and do a kind of inception thing within this presentation where I'm going to have Anna click that link to get out to the other presentation on the Thriving Communities Grantmakers Program, which I'll be speaking about very, very quickly. So Thriving Communities Grantmakers Grants is a very interesting program. It's very different than a lot of other programs that are grant programs that have come out of the federal government. Because if you do decide to apply to this grant, you do not apply directly to the federal government, you'd apply to a grant maker. And in EPA Region 7, that grant maker is RTI, or the Research Triangle Institute. They have been awarded basically, well, $100 million, but $40 million for Region 7 to regrant. So they are the pass-through entity for this EPA funding. They've gotten the funding and they are going to be granting it out to community groups in the region. Slide, please. So the Thriving Communities Grantmakers Program, which is alternately known and referred to as TCGP and TCGM, provides around $600 million total to address environmental justice and public health issues in underserved communities. Now, these underserved communities are defined by the EPA IRA Disadvantaged Communities Map. If you don't know what that is or want help figuring out if you fall into what is determined as a disadvantaged community under the EPA definition, please reach out to us. We're very happy to help you kind of determine your eligibility for that. Again, this grant is, it's very broad, can be used for a broad number of things, and there are a lot of different groups that are eligible. So if you're smaller than a state government and you're a nonprofit entity, if you're an institution of higher education, if you're a local government, you're doing work in a disadvantaged community, you're likely eligible for this grant. Slide, please. Now, you saw the map from earlier. So each region of the United States has its own grant maker, and all of those grant makers are going to be releasing requests for proposals that are slightly different, which is a little bit confusing. You only need to worry about one, and that's the one that's coming out of RTI in Region 7. We do know some things that are going to be consistent across the scope of the grant makers grants. So, and one of those things is this tier system. So we know that each grant maker will be making non-competitive grants of $75,000 available to capacity-constrained community-based organizations. Now, what capacity-constrained means is going to be enumerated by the grant maker in that request for proposal or RFP. CBO, thank you, is a community-based organization. And a capacity-constrained CBO is basically, if you think about somebody who maybe doesn't have the time or staffing capacity to write a 4 to 8 hour grant, they might want to look into applying for this non-competitive funding. Now, the tiers of the grant start at $150,000 for 1 year assessment, $250,000 for 1 to 2 years of planning, or that last tier is $350,000 for development. Slide, please. These are just examples of potential projects under each of the tiers. Again, this is by no means an exhaustive list. This is a relatively loose grant, at least in comparison to others. And a lot of different projects are going to be eligible under these grants, but this is just to give you a rough idea of some projects that you might be interested in pursuing. Also, to answer the question I think we'll probably get, all of these slides will be available to you after the presentation, so you can take time to look at them beyond my very rapid fire run through of this. A slide, please. Okay, so the request for proposals from the Region 7 grant maker, which is RTI, is not released yet. What I can tell you about it is that they are planning on releasing it in mid-October. They're saying that is going to be an application that is around 2,000 words or less. So we're guessing like a 4 to 8 hour application. And that you are going to need a unique entity ID to be awarded this funding. But that unlike most grants, and especially unlike most grants coming out of the federal government, you do not need a SAM.gov account at the time that you register or that you apply for this grant. You need to show that you're working on getting one, and that you're working on getting a unique entity ID out of that SAM.gov account, but you don't have to have one at the time of applying. Slide, please. So these are the things that we are suggesting basically as a start. You guys are already ahead of the game because the request for proposals hasn't actually dropped yet for Region 7, but this is something, again, on the horizon that's going to be a relatively light lift that a lot of people are going to be eligible for. So we wanted to be able to spotlight it. We'll also be providing technical assistance on this grant. So please come to EPN if you do have any questions. We can help you check your eligibility, and we can also help with SAM.gov registration if that's something you need to do. And I'll, field any questions about grant makers later, but I'll return to the presentation for now. Thank you. So I've highlighted a program coming out of EPA, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about who you can get in touch with. Yeah, that's good, Anna. This is the EPA regional office structure. I'm not going to go super in depth on this. I think the point to make here is just that there is a regional office, and that office is EPA Region 7, which covers Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and the 9 tribal nations. And these are going to be your point people for local issues. I want to really quickly pull out the Environmental Justice, Community Engagement, and Environmental Review Division. Out of this. If you are working in a disadvantaged community or on a project in a disadvantaged community, these are great people to talk to about what grants are available to you, how to access that funding, or how to access support from the EPA generally. Slide, please. Again, this is just kind of continuing to list offices, and there's a very thorough org chart on the EPA website, but all the information is here if you want to as well. Slide. So when do you contact the EPA? I'd say if you notice pollution, hazardous waste, or other environmental violations happening near you, if you believe there is a health risk related to environmental factors like contaminated water or air, if you have questions about environmental regulations or compliance for your organization or an organization around you, if you need information or assistance with environmental permits, again, if you're interested in grant funding or learning how to pursue it, or of course, if you want to provide input on proposed regulations, policies, or projects that might affect the environment around you. Slide, please. Now, this is kind of how to contact the EPA. Again, all of this is publicly available information. You'll notice that I drew out kind of the Region 7 office. Those first 2 points are for, urgent issues. If you've seen a pollutant spill or witnessed some sort of environmental crime, okay, maybe you want to call this hotline and get in touch with people. EPA also has a lot of different kind of intake forms and various points of contacts who you can email. You can also email the general Region 7 office info email, and they'll divert you to, whoever you do need to speak to. Now, if the agency is not getting back to you in a timely manner, which, they define as around 10 business days, or you feel like you're hitting communications that they're not understanding what you're saying, or you're just getting stonewalled, by all means, I would say please come to EPN and we can help you kind of craft a message and figure out who the right person to get in touch with is. All right, slide, please. Okay, I'm going to speed run these next slides to make sure that we have enough time for Anna, Heather, and Mark to get to what they want to say. DOE, U.S. Department of Energy, again, these slides will be available after the presentation. All the information about DOE is here. I really want to quickly go to the next slide and pull out the most relevant information about DOE for our purposes here, which is about the Department of Community Engagement out of DOE. And they provide capacity building and technical assistance for community groups. So again, this is your front door to DOE, and these are the people you want to be getting in touch with if you're interested in DOE grants. I'm going to very quickly touch on the State Energy Program, which is a program out of DOE that provides funding and technical assistance to the states. There is a fact sheet linked on this presentation, and basically it's just if you can think of funding that you might need for emissions reductions projects or weatherization projects, energy efficiency upgrades, there might be something in the State Energy Program for you. Slide, please. All right, so this is a map of the DOE Office of Community Engagement, and you can see that their regions work somewhat differently than the EPA regions do. Your person for region, or your people, I should say, for Region 7 are going to be Bobby Boyd in the Midwestern top, and the South Central region, Jeremiah Rivera. For rural and tribal issues, you can contact Peter Olivares. And, this kind of covers Region 7, I would say. For more general contacts, you can just go to the contact page of DOE, OCE, and then they also have office hours, which I believe at this point are, I think, bi-weekly, and the link for that is in the bottom left. Slide, please. Okay, FEMA, and I'll spend barely a second on FEMA. But FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They are the people you see after natural disasters happen, who are providing kind of assistance and aid. I would say the big thing to pull out of this is that FEMA also works on preparedness and mitigation and rescuing stranded assets, which is something that not everybody necessarily knows. So there is often money available from FEMA and assistance available from FEMA when it comes to creating climate resilience infrastructure near you. And then when things do happen, like let's say your house is built on a floodplain, FEMA offers buyouts. So to essentially rescue that stranded asset. Again, there's contact information below, and I've put together some pages for each of the states. It'll take you to your FEMA state page, and you can see whether there's an emergency declaration in your state, and the resources FEMA offers there. Slide, please. All right, so I get to take a breath now, and this is kind of the end of my portion. If you are interested in technical assistance from EPN, please feel free to scan that QR code. We'll also drop a link in the chat to get to our website. You can also get in touch with us through HEJC very, very easily. We're closely partnered with them and work with them all the time, and you can contact myself or Ryan if you want to. But yes, thank you for letting me speak, giving me your time, and bearing with me through that very, very, very quick kind of overview of those federal government agencies. I think without further ado, I'll pass it over to Anna for the next part.
Yeah, I did just want to quickly touch on this attempt at an org chart. It's pretty hard to make a tidy and comprehensive chart that shows how federal agencies might relate to their state counterparts, but just to kind of show that in addition to trying to find the right federal partner in your work, you should also try to identify their state counterpart. So that's not always like a clear line for which organization works together, but it just kind of trying to capture how the EPA might relate if you're, for instance, in Nebraska, to the Nebraska Department of Energy and Environment. So each of these are a little bit different depending on where you are and where you work, but just kind of look out for this. We would suggest navigate through these state organizations as well, get familiar with their grant cycles, and sign up for their news alerts. And with that, I'm now going to pass it off to Mark to introduce himself and share some pointers for developing relationships with federal agencies.
Great. Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Shonali. Good presentation. I'm Mark Hague. I'm with the Environmental Protection Network. I've been a volunteer since around 2018 and am a member of the board of directors and chair of the board. Prior to joining EPN, I retired from EPA in 2017. I finished my career serving as the regional administrator. Prior to that position, being appointed to that position, I was the deputy regional administrator, which is the senior career official. And prior to that, I held a number of management and leadership positions in the region. Most notably and relevant to this, I led this very small team that was responsible for enforcement coordination and environmental justice. And I kind of chuckle now they have their entire division. When I took on the EJ work, I had 2 staff and myself. So it's grown quite a bit, which is great. What I want to talk about is just sort of effective engagement and relationship building with federal agencies, particularly EPA and probably others. And, for some of you just looking kind of at the participant list, you come from varying backgrounds, other state or local organizations or universities and institutions. So probably a lot of what I'm going to say will be like, duh, Mark, that's pretty common sense. But some of it I'm going to just kind of offer from the perspective of having communities or groups come in and meet with me and my teams over the years, and what seemed to make those interactions lead to more productive outcomes at the end of establishing a relationship. Oftentimes, particularly if we were going to community meetings, we'd meet with people and we'd get this sort of big, broad overview, come fix my problem. And you'd start talking about the problem and you weren't quite sure what it was or who it affected and how it impacted that community directly. So, the earlier you can begin the engagement with EPA, and one of the nice things, I appreciate Shonali kind of highlighting the new Environmental Justice and Engagement Division, because now there's really a clearly set up group of people whose job it is to run effective, meaningful engagement. It's just a little more pronounced. They have more person power to kind of bring to bear. So I would suggest if you have issues that you're either looking for in your community or representing communities or trying to help connect communities, to start with the team at EPA Region 7 and the other regions as well, with their EJ divisions, and try and develop an early contact with someone to develop kind of a point of contact. Because the other thing that came up in Shonali's presentation, there were 8 or 9 different blocks for different divisions at EPA. And what typically will happen is when people are coming in to work with the agency, you'll come to say one division or even the EJ team now and talk about a particular problem and say it's a water issue. Well, what they're going to have to do is connect with somebody in the water division. And if it has water monitoring, maybe somebody in the science division. So having that kind of early engagement, developing a relationship with a potential point of contact who can kind of help you navigate or put you in contact with the other parts of either Region 7. And oftentimes there's other resources in the agency, whether it be in our headquarters offices, nationally for some additional resources or expertise. There's a huge research division in EPA that can provide a lot of science-based information on things like how to do effective monitoring, what kind of protocols to follow to collect data. So getting that point of contact early on and kind of working with them to scope and define problems can be really, really effective moving forward. And the scoping part can be really helpful. And in terms of the thing that a lot of times was most helpful is when we would have an initial engagement with a group, hearing a good kind of timeline or chronology or history of what led to the purpose of whatever the discussion was we were having. What have been successes? What are some barriers? And why is it you're coming to EPA to request certain types of assistance, describing sort of barriers or sticking points you're getting or lack of information, so that you can really start scoping down what are the sort of nuts of various issues and topics that we're dealing with, and also what other partners have people been working with. The chart that kind of showed the relationship of EPA to other state and local partners is really helpful. And I would add to that, not to make the chart more complex, but even state health departments are really important moving forward, because as Shonali mentioned, kind of the human health and environment are big parts. And a lot of times that health aspect in the states is really in a whole separate department in the health agencies there. So being able to come in with kind of that history background, other partners you've worked with, stumbling points, where things have been left off and where you see the gaps. Excuse me, I'm fighting a bit of a cold, so excuse my coughing. And back to the scoping, to make it really a good, meaningful and specific engagement, what helps more is if you have a long list of problems you're trying to tackle. The most successful engagements you've seen is coming in with a very clear, this is our biggest top concern that we have and we need to address. And why, instead of trying to tackle all 10 things at the same time, often, kind of triaging things in a way that you can identify, kind of the single most 2 or 3 top issues, because there's a capacity that EPA is going to have And you're not probably the only person. There's probably a meeting in the afternoon after your morning meeting or call with somebody who else is coming in looking for the same kind of assistance. So kind of knowing what's most important and where you want to focus first is always helpful. And sometimes they are single kind of topical issues. We've had things over the years, or I keep saying we as if I'm still at EPA, but where people come in and say, my particular issue is with the way a particular state agency is issuing air or water or land permits, and we want to focus in on that topic. That's very great. It's very specific, very narrow. People can get engaged. But sometimes in broad community issues, there's just so many breadth of issues that people are dealing with. It takes some time to sort through that and scope through all that. That can be kind of can take a lot of time. So the more you come in a little more focused, the better. And then, but also have kind of a plan for any additional topics following through. As I mentioned and was on the charts, just to reiterate, if you start out with, just a general public inquiry through the public inquiry lines or any of the tips and complaints or through the EJ division, there's probably other work that folks in the region are going to have to do to understand your issue, then find the technical expertise within the building to help out. If you're calling about, we talked a lot and Shonali went through a number of grant applications and processes that are in play now. And one of the nice things about connecting with you all in this call with all of us from who are putting the call on is if you're calling about an active open grant engagement, be prepared. You're going to get a lot of very sort of stilted, bureaucratic, very rote kind of answers to questions because there's a whole broad competition policy around grants that EPA has to operate under. So what's said to one has to be said to all. So you can't call up, and I can't call Shonali and say, hey, Shonali, did I fill this part of the grant out, or help me understand and interpret this part of what you really are looking for? Give me some feedback on some of these things. It has to be kind of transparent and open to everyone. So the best way, if it's around a grant competition, if you see seminars, webinars, public availability meetings, get to those as often as you can, or send representatives and get them engaged early and get familiar with the people who are doing it, because the more they can, sort Mark out from Shonali and Heather out from Anna and Anna from and understand those issues, the more effective it'll be moving forward. So those seminars or public availability sessions are really, really helpful because it just starts building a familiarity with, who you are, what you're trying to work on, and what some of your issues are. But all of that has to be kind of done in the open light of day for EPA. Otherwise, if it's felt that, Mark got more information by sort of working back channels, that can mess up the whole grant competition. He can be thrown out. It could require him to go back and recompete. So they're going to be very rigid about who and what they say offline from other public forums. So if it's particular to a grant, do not, try to make every session you can. And then if you're still struggling, that's where groups like Heartland Center and Wichita State and EPN and other resources can come to bear to have those one-on-one conversations to help, Shonali mentioned, help formulate maybe the right question to ask or help evaluate kind of where they're at and refine things a little bit more. That's one of the great things about what we've been doing at EPN is we can kind of work behind the scenes and give that sort of mentoring, coaching, technical guidance and assistance behind the scenes. We can't represent back, but we can certainly help people be more effective in their interactions with EPA. The other thing, and I'm going to sound like I'm still a shill for EPA, but one of the things I was meeting with some folks out there recently, and one of the things that came up is since I left in 2017, they've hired over 300 new staff in the region. So a lot of times you're going to be reaching out and potentially connecting with somebody that's only been in the job a couple years, maybe at best, or even shorter than that. So they are rapidly building up a new team of experts and technical expertise, and all of these people are incredibly sharp. But experience is also a good teacher. So a certain healthy dose of patience will go a long way, because you may be asking a question that they haven't dealt with before, and they're going to have to take a little bit more time to kind of figure out and get the right answer, because there's certainly a high value on making sure you're accurate with getting information back. Plus, there's just, with the wealth of money that has come to EPA in the Inflation Reduction Act and elsewhere, there's just an incredible amount of grant money going out. I mean, the idea that Region 4 would have 40 million, was it, Shonali, set aside for grant maker grants. I think in my 37-year career at EPA around EJ, if we had $1 million worth of grants in that time, that would have been outstanding. So it's just an unprecedented amount of money under strict deadlines and tight deadlines to get it out. So they're doing all that while building a new EJ division, while hiring up new staff and doing all the other normal work that goes. So a little patience will go a long way. But again, going back to that earlier part I made about making early contacts, trying to set up a good point of contact for kind of help you navigate through the bureaucracy will help. Shonali touched on a little bit, but just to emphasize it, although it's one big happy federal family, we are a very diverse family, and not all federal agencies are the same. Even once, when we were in EPA, sometimes dealing with our federal partners was always a little different, because what a region in EPA Region 7 might have total absolute control over a grant competition, other regions and other federal agencies may have been running out of headquarters or other organizations. So everybody's a little bit different. And some are different in that they have a regional presence, but the main staff are located maybe in DC or some other locale, where EPA, probably a good third of the workforce is in the regions. But I know in some of our partner agencies, they had, a fifth of the staff we did, or sometimes like some of the transportation people were 2- and 3-person offices for the entire region. So they're just all organized a little bit differently, have different relationships. So you may find that you're dealing with not only different geographic locations, but maybe more centralized functions elsewhere. So it's, best not to assume what works with one will always work with the other. Although I would say early engagement, building good relationships goes a long way. And the thing that I always appreciated most was when we met with the community and someone would sit down and say, okay, we had a great discussion. We listed a few things. Here's a couple things we're going to work on. When can we follow up, and what can we expect when? Because that just builds some little accountability shared by everybody moving forward. And again, I'm not saying anything any of us haven't dealt with in our regular lives and professional lives, but making sure there's kind of clear follow-up and milestones and expectations and what those are. And even following up with a short email or something saying, just want to be clear, here's what I think we heard, here's what I thought you said you would do, and when we can expect a follow-up kind of thing, to keep that communication going and keep it open and be, it was always greatly appreciated. I'll stop there. I think my voice is about to give out anyway, so it's probably a good thing for all of you, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm going to pass it over to Heather to wrap us up with some tips on navigating federal funding opportunities.
Great, thanks, Anna. So yeah, I'll be speaking a little bit more from maybe the applicant side. It's been great to hear so much good advice from Shonali and Mark. And if you want to go to the next slide, I'll just briefly share, my background. I'm coming to this work. As Anna said, I'm the director of the Midwest Climate Collaborative, which is a multi-sector network across our 12-state region. Before this, I was in local government. I was an alderwoman in the city of St. Louis. And before that, I directed a statewide environmental advocacy organization, the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. So, and I practiced law a little bit before then. So I'm bringing that experience to this effort of applying for federal funds, and I'm excited to share a little bit about what we've been learning with all of you. So if you want to go to the next one. So I think one thing just to keep in mind is that, a lot of the funds that we're talking about are from, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, BIL. It's not called the Climate Reduction Act for a reason. And I think it's important for us to think about all of the types of projects that are out there that can be funded through these funds. And so, if you're working on housing, you're working on food security, you're working on education, conservation, there's so many different things that are related to this funding. And I think that's one thing that's really important as we talk to our communities, especially that you don't have to be working on quote unquote climate to be eligible for these funds. Next slide. So this is just kind of an overview. I know we're talking mostly about federal funds, but I think it's important for us to be thinking about how can we be leveraging these federal funds to do even more. So one, just thinking about all the different types of funding that is out there. So one, there are the competitive grants, which especially I think folks in the nonprofit sector are most familiar with. Those are the, get your application in, dot all your I's, cross all your T's, and then cross your fingers. There's formula funds, which are based on a specific formula. Sometimes it's population, it could be income, different demographics. And it's like there's a certain amount that's out there that's been designated, usually at the state level. And as long as you have a project, an application that meets the criteria, then, boom, you get that particular amount. You're not necessarily competing with anybody else. And then you've got rebates, you've got tax credits. And the big thing now is that these tax credits through direct or elective pay are eligible to tax exempt entities, which is kind of mind blowing for a lot of us in the nonprofit sector or local government, schools. We can now take advantage of these tax credits through the IRA. There's also low interest and forgivable loans. There's also these challenges and competitions that are out there. So again, they're competitive, but instead of having a contract that, okay, we say we're going to do this project, we get funding, and then you give us money to do that project. It's often, we've developed this material, or we have this idea, and if your idea or your project wins, you get a flat amount of funding. And we see a lot of those, I think, in the more in the private sector in terms of, I shouldn't say private sector, but well, yeah, private sector, schools, business ideas, entrepreneurship, that sort of thing. And then technical assistance, like what Shonali offers through EPN. And then these are coming on the right, these boxes just indicate the different sources. So there's federal agencies, there's state agencies, and some of this federal money is going to the state agencies. And so that's who you ultimately go to apply, like the home energy rebates right now. You're going to go through your state, even though the money is starting from the feds. Private foundations, banks, right now, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, though that money is going to flow through banks, lenders, CDFIs, community development financial institutions. And so following those, also utilities often are often rebates and various grants. And I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is, if you are looking for federal funding, sometimes you can go to a private foundation and they will provide funding for you to be able to put together an application for a federal grant. So just keep that in mind. If there is, especially a local foundation that wants to help out, you can say, hey, could you give us $10,000 to hire a grant writer or convene some meetings, or whatever it might be. Next slide. Thanks. These next two slides are just kind of summing up where is all of this money we're talking about. We keep talking about these billions and billions of dollars. This is put together by the Climate Program Portal. And this shows, most of this is going to state governments, and then commercial industry and nonprofits, and then local governments, and then federal agencies, public transit agencies. That little bitty black box on the bottom right-hand corner is actual residents. So I believe that's like through rebates and that sort of thing. But I think one of the things that's important to look at here is that if you're trying to figure out how can I get my hand on these federal dollars, a lot of it is being channeled through the states, through your state energy office. It could be through a housing office. It could be through your state emergency management office. So it's just kind of interesting to see where this money's going. Next slide. This next one is also from the Climate Program portal. And what I do is I go every couple of weeks and download the new data by state. And so this is how you can see how are our states doing when it comes to getting funding. And this is the awarded and allocated funding. And Illinois is up there with 5.3 billion, Michigan 4.2 billion. So I think this can be helpful. One, just in motivating ourselves. Yes, there is money out there. Yes, we may be in states that we don't think of as leaders on climate change, but they are going out there. They're getting a lot of money. Collectively, the Midwest, our 12 states, has drawn down about 16% of all of the overall federal funding. Next slide. Okay, so if you're applying for any of this money, this might be how you're feeling. So I just want to recognize that this is a fire hose to your face, knocking you off of a ship into shark-infested waters. That might be how you feel right now, but there is help out there. So next slide. So some of the hurdles that we know that are out there, one, just knowing about the grants, which is great. EPN is really helpful. Knowing about the grants, knowing about these funders, as Mark said, getting to know who these federal agencies are, building relationships, knowing who you can go to for questions, and then lack of capacity. It takes time and money, honestly, to be able to even apply for some of these things, to understand the issues, to get trained, to build relationships, and then to decide if you should hire a grant writer. Maybe you need to hire one, maybe you're going to have to bring on staff. So we know that these are some of the hurdles that are out there. So in this next slide, I just want to share some real practical resources. Actually, I guess not quite there. So this is just how we're approaching this as the Midwest Climate Collaborative. We recognize to get a federal grant across the finish line, out the door, I mean, we're not even talking about implementing it yet, but you're going to need technical assistance. You're going to need somebody to write that grant, again, whether it's in-house or a contractor, and you're probably going to need partnerships, a network, relationships. And so that's part of what we do through the Midwest Climate Collaborative. That's something that I think anybody who's applying just needs to think about. What does your team look like? Who do you need? What bubble? And these are like my little bubble gum here balls. Who do I need to be able to get this grant across the finish line? So the next slide, sharing some of the resources that we found helpful. So one, I want to just give a quick plug. Through a grant that we have, we are offering free day-long grant development trainings. There's 4 different modules that are being offered by Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville, and we're kicking this off in mid-Missouri. So if you're in, or if you can get to mid-Missouri, to Columbia on October 10th, information's on our website, and there's 2 different modules that are being offered that day. So, if you're in a nonprofit, you're in local government, or you're an individual who wants to be able to offer grant writing services to others in your community, these workshops are for you. The Tic Tacs, which we've heard about, obviously, Anna and her team, EPN, and then Great Plains Institute, also known as GPI, Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. These are 2 other organizations in our region that can help with grant writing support. And you have to reach out to, I can get you contacts if you want to email me. Sometimes it's specific grants that they're able to help you with. Sometimes what they do is they put together a cohort of folks who are working on the same grant so that they can work together, figure out how they need to get the information and technical assistance. And then I think I just have one more with the 1 minute we have left. Resources. So yeah, this Google Sheet is an open source form that we've been tracking grants. We also track who wins different grants. So if you want to go and see, like, okay, last year who got this grant, it could be really helpful to find out, was this worth it? How did you, what did you do? So definitely check that out. There's several tabs on there. One for resources. That state tracking data from the Climate Program portal is on the last tab. If you'd like to add anything, it is an open source doc. Just please be considerate of the fact that there are a lot of other people using it. The Climate Program portal, that's the one that they have opportunities as well as outcomes. University of Michigan has a great tracker. This Afford tool is kind of like shopping for a cell phone. You put in what kind of grant you're looking for, if it's a grant or a loan, if it's on resiliency or renewables, whatever the topic is, what type of entity you are, and it spits out a bunch of things that you'd be eligible for, and then you can compare. You can select the ones and you say, I want to line these 3 or 4 or 5 up and look at their deadlines, look at their match, and decide which ones I want to apply for. So that's really helpful. Lawyers for Good Government, great resource if you're interested in direct pay. They will help walk you through that process. State Funding Readiness Project offers pro bono assistance to community-based organizations, local governments, tribes, subscribes for grant assistance. And then the Climate Herald is a website that you can see like what other policies are passing in other places. And actually, I do have one last slide, key takeaways. And I'll drop my email in the chat for anybody who wants to follow up afterwards. But I mean, bottom line, there is funding out there. It can be difficult to get, which we know, but there are folks out there who want to offer technical assistance. There are networks out there to build those relationships. The Midwest Climate Collaborative is one of those. I host a Federal Funding Friday every Friday at 9 a.m. And actually, Shonali and her team are going to be helping this week because I've got a meeting. But it's just a great chance to hop on and hear from other people who are in a similar boat to you. We also bring in speakers. So, you know, if you want to learn a little bit more about direct pay, for example, or community change grants or whatever it might be, we bring in folks. So yeah, you're not alone. Build your team. People are here to help, and we're going to solve this problem. We're going to save the world together. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Heather. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It is 2 o'clock. I haven't seen any questions come through in the chat specifically, so I won't pause there unless someone has a very, very short question. And just kind of leave it on, oops, sorry, now I'm getting lost in my slide. Leave it on a plug for some future conversations that we'll be hosting to help kind of facilitate more engagement in environmental justice. And the next one is coming up on Thursday, October 17th, focused on environmental justice in rural communities. And then we have a couple more later in the month, focused more on coalition building. And then really our first in-person, that's going to give folks some tools to do organizing in their own communities around environmental justice. So visit HEJC's website to learn more about those, sign up. We'd love to hear about other topics you're interested in learning more about, or even sharing your own story about things that you're doing in your communities. And then I'll leave it with a link to our website so you can get in touch with us, follow HEJC and find out about more resources. And we'll capture all the great links that our speakers shared, so everyone has access to those, as well as this